I have the privilege to introduce Carole Starr. Carole Starr, in 1999, Carole Starr was 32-year-old and building a career as a professional educator. She spent much of her free time playing the violin in an orchestra and singing in a chorus. That life ended on July 6, 1999, when Carole was broadsided on the driver's side by a vehicle going 50 miles an hour, resulting in a brain injury. She struggled to cope with many symptoms of brain injury and to adapt to a life forever changed. Carole was unable to return to work or music and still lives with daily brain injury symptoms. Over many years and one small step at a time, she has reinvented herself. Carole is now a national keynote speaker, the author of To Root and to Rise, Accepting Brain Injury, and the founder-facilitator of Brain Injury Voices, an award-winning survivor volunteer group in Maine. Carole's nearly 20-year brain injury journey has taught her much about coping with loss, coming to acceptance, and finding joy again. Today, she's going to share strategies to cope with adversity. Let's give a warm welcome to Carole Starr.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am so delighted to be here, to have this opportunity to open this conference, to be able to share some of what I've learned in my now nearly 20-year journey with brain injury. Actually, in 2 weeks, it will be the 20-year anniversary of my injury. So let's begin with the unusual title of my speech, Weasilience. Some of you might have seen that word in the program and wondered, what kind of wackadoodle word is Weasilience? It is my own made-up word, and it's a play on the word resilience. And that's what this speech is all about. And I promise, you're only going to have to wait just a few more minutes, and then you too will know the secret of why I titled this speech, Weasilience, Handling Life's Wild Moments. So what is resilience? And why is it such an important topic for all of us in this room, whether we're brain injury survivors, caregivers, professionals? I looked up the word, and I learned that the word resilience, it comes from a Latin verb that means to leap back. I think that's an important concept for all of us to know because that relates to the traditional definition of resilience. Traditionally, we think of a resilient person as somebody who adapts well to adversity, somebody who bounces back after tragedy. Well, no offense to the ancient Romans, but I've got a bit of a problem with that definition. And what I don't like about it is I don't like those words bounce back because they imply that resilience means going back to normal, going back to the way life used to be before a tragedy happened. And so many times, that just is not possible. Adversity, whether it comes from brain injury, whether it comes from something else, it changes us. I know in my own experience as a brain injury survivor, I kind of think of brain injury sort of like a meat cleaver that just sliced right through my life. And it sharply divided it into a before and an after, an old Carole and a new Carole. As much as I wanted to, as hard as I tried, I couldn't bounce back to the old Carole. I am forever changed by my brain injury. But I am still a resilient person. All of us are resilient people. So I'm going to tweak the definition of resilience just a little bit. Resilience doesn't have to mean bouncing back. Instead, resilience can be about learning to bounce forward. And why is bouncing forward an important concept for all of us in this room? Because at some point, every single one of us here gets challenged by wild moments in our lives. We have those life events that shake us to our core, that threaten to tear us apart, that change us forever. Things like the death of a loved one, the end of a relationship, a job loss, a health scare, a brain injury. Unfortunately, it seems like adversity, it is just part of the human experience. Bad stuff happens to us. But here's the good news. Resilience is also part of the human experience. It is possible to find our way through life's challenges and even grow stronger because of them. And that's what we're focusing on today. strategies for bouncing forward and growing stronger after adversity. I have 3 main lessons that I'm going to share about increasing resilience through this speech, and I'm going to illustrate those lessons through telling you a story. I like to do my storytelling away from podiums, so I'm going to move over here to tell you this story. So this is a true story. Everything happened. It happened all the way back in 2007. It was early March, 4 o'clock in the morning. And I woke up because I heard this scratching noise. And I was half asleep. I thought, oh, there must be some kind of an animal outside my bedroom window. But as I continued to wake up, I had the horrifying realization that that sound, that wasn't coming from outside, that was coming from inside. There was something running around underneath my bed. In a panic, I turned on the light, and as the light filled the room, I saw a something dash out of my bedroom. I jumped out of bed, I closed the door, jumped back into bed, and I pulled the covers up around my neck, and I sat there shaking. What in the world had gotten into my house? And what was I going to do about it? It was 4 o'clock in the morning. Much too early to call anybody for help. I could hear the thing now in the next room and also realized that I couldn't call anybody because it was in the room where the phone was. So I sat there for a while and said, well, you need to figure out what this thing is. So I gathered my courage and I tiptoed into the next room and I turned on every light as I went. And there, running along the back wall of my office, was this little creature. It was maybe this long, it was pure white, had a black tip on its tail, looked like this. For those of you who are closer to the stage, I brought a prop with me today. You can hang out over here for now. I had no idea what this thing was or what I was going to do about it. And as sometimes happens when I don't know what to do, I kind of froze for like 2 hours. I just sat there and I stared at the thing. I wasn't scared of it. You can see it's kind of cute. It didn't seem to be very scared of me either. It would come to maybe within a foot of me. I noticed that it liked spending time underneath the spare bed that I have in my office. That's where I store my gift wrap tubes. And this thing would go in and out of my gift wrap tubes and kind of look out at me. As I watched this thing, I thought, I think this is a ferret. I think somebody's pet ferret has gotten into my house. I'd never seen a ferret before, but I had seen pictures of them, and this kind of looked like that. And I remembered that the day before, there'd been a big snowstorm, and I had gone outside to shovel snow. And when I did that, the snow built up near my storm door, and it got propped open a little bit. I thought, I bet you that's how this thing got in here. Now, the improbability of one of my neighbors being out in the middle of a snowstorm with their pet ferret did not occur to me at that moment. But I was comforted to think, okay, this is somebody's pet that's in my house. So somewhere between 6 and 6:30, I decided to call my parents for advice, knowing that they would be awake at that hour and would not mind a phone call from me so early. They had 2 pieces of advice for me. 1, call animal control, and 2, stop staring at the thing. So I took both of their pieces of advice. I shut the door to my office, trapping my furry friend in there. I took a shower, had breakfast, read the paper. I called the town office. They were able to come right away. I was the first call of the day. Animal control man arrives. We open the door to my office. The little beast is no longer there. Apparently he could go underneath the door. So we started to search my house for this thing. And at first we couldn't find it. And I wondered, maybe even half hoped, maybe it was all a dream. Maybe I hallucinated the entire thing. But no, we did indeed find the creature again. It was back in my bedroom, on my bed, behind my pillow, looking out at us. I did a lot of laundry later on that day. Animal control man took one look at the thing and said, "Ma'am, that's no ferret, that's a wild weasel." Hence the title of my talk, Weasilience. I think I went just a little weak in the knees when I realized I'd spent the early morning hours commuting with a wild animal. Now, animal control man, by all rights, he could have left right then and there because his job was dealing with unwanted domesticated animals, not wild ones. But he was a nice guy. He said, "Well, I'm here. I've got nowhere else to be. Let me see if I can help you catch this thing." So we proceeded to chase this weasel through my house. I now have a new appreciation for the phrase, to weasel one's way out of something. Because this little weasel weaseled its way out of every trap and snare the animal control man had with him. So eventually, we chased the thing into my kitchen, where apparently between the baseboard and the cupboard, there's a little space. In went the weasel. At this point, animal control man's radio crackled. He had another call. He had to leave. That's when all the emotion that had been building up in me since 4 o'clock in the morning just came spilling out, and I sobbed in front of animal control man. I think I scared the poor guy. He took pity on me. He said, well, I know somebody who specializes in wild animal trapping. I will give him a call for you. I'm not sure, but I think it was hearing the word trap, because suddenly my mind flashed back to my early morning hours spent with the weasel. And I remembered how it liked my gift wrap tubes. I said, can we set a trap for the thing? So we got one of those gift wrap tubes, and we duct taped the end. And we put it in that corner, hoping that there was only one way in and one way out. Animal control man leaves. I'm alone with my wildlife. I pulled up a chair, and I sat and I stared at that corner and I cried for about an hour. But eventually, the weasel did indeed come out. And he went right into the tube. Now, admittedly, I had not fully thought out the next phase of this plan. To this day, I don't know whether it was bravery or stupidity, but I grabbed the end of that tube and I ran through my house with a tube of weasel. I rushed to the front door, I flung it open, and I launched that tube right out onto a snowbank. And then I watched, shaking from behind the safety of my closed door, as my dazed little weasel eventually exited the tube, and went bouncing across the snowbanks, never to be seen again. All right, let's see what we're doing here. There we go. I'm sure I gave that weasel the ride of its life. Later on that day, the wild animal specialist that animal control man had contacted, he called me back. He was very impressed when I told him how I had caught the thing. He had a very thick Maine accent, and these were his words of congratulations to me. He said, well now, aren't you a good little trapper? So that's my story. So you might be thinking, okay, yeah, Carole, that was a funny story, but why in the world did you just tell us that story? Why is that story relevant at a brain injury conference? What does that story have to do with resilience? Well, as it turns out, my little weasel friend is actually a really good symbol of resilience. I looked it up, and I learned that in Native American culture, the weasel is a symbol of fierce courage. Every single one of us in this room knows how much fierceness, how much courage it takes to face adversity, to face a life-changing event. The appearance of the weasel, it's also an invitation to observe deeply, to find the hidden meanings of events. All of us, to find resilience, have to be willing to look deeply at our own experience, to find our own unique path to resilience. I promised you 3 lessons from my weasel story that relate to coping with adversity. So here they are. In order to bounce forward after brain injury, it's important to overcome denial, to observe the situation, and learn from the experience. And the rest of my speech is going to be devoted to unpacking each one of those, and I have specific strategies within each one of those. All of these lessons and strategies I put together on a handout, which will be available on the BIAPA website. So my first lesson is about overcoming denial. Now, in my weasel adventure, even though I could plainly see that little creature that was running all over my house, I still kind of tried to deny it. I didn't want to get out of bed to face it. I hoped it was a pet ferret instead of a wild animal. I wanted it to be a hallucination when animal control man and I couldn't find it at first. Denial is a really common experience after adversity. When something bad happens to us, be it a weasel, a death, a divorce, a job loss, a scary diagnosis, a brain injury, Denial is often where we go first, because reality, it is just too hard to process. It is too much to bear. It's that feeling of, this can't possibly be real. This is not happening. When faced with adversity, how many of us have had feelings like that? Denial can be good for a while. It's protective. Denial can give us a little bit of breathing space. It gives us room to move eventually towards acceptance. In my weasel adventure, I think I needed that time in bed with the covers up around my neck in order to start to process what was happening. What was I going to do? But we can't stay in denial for too long, because eventually denial, it will get in the way of moving forward. In my weasel story, I couldn't stay in bed forever. I had to gather my courage and face that unknown creature. When we're dealing with a challenge, be it brain injury, be it something else, there comes a time to accept what is, to move forward with a new reality, even though that might be painful. Letting go of denial, that's the beginning of resilience. It took me a long 5 years to stop denying my brain injury and its symptoms, to let go of returning to who I used to be, my old life. It took 8 years until I reached full acceptance of my new self, my new path. When I think back to denial and what that was like for me, here's the image that comes to mind. A big old rock. Denial can be like a giant boulder, a wall of rock that gets in the way of us moving forward. Here are some of the ways that denial showed up for me after my brain injury. There was this frantic voice inside me yelling over and over again, no, 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 this is not real. Every night before I go to sleep, my last thoughts would be, maybe tomorrow. Maybe tomorrow is the day that I'm just going to wake up normal and all of these symptoms will just magically go away. I didn't want to admit just how confused I was. So a lot of the time I tried to minimize or hide my symptoms from my family and friends and medical professionals. I flat out refused to use strategies to get things done. I was going to do things the way I had always done them. I thought that the only way forward was to continue to push and push and push, to get back to my old life, my old self, to be a teacher again, to be an amateur classical musician again, even though every time I tried to do those things, I failed. I've learned that overcoming denial, it is a process, one that can be particularly difficult given the nature of brain injury. I know that it was for me. I like to think about things in terms of images and metaphors. So when I think back to, well, how was it that I got through to the denial stage? How did I get from denial to acceptance? One of the images that comes to mind for me is seeds. Seeds that get planted, that can take root and grow. Seeds that eventually can become strong enough to break through stone, to break through that rock of denial. When I look back at my experience, I thought about, well, what are those seeds that break through denial? And I've identified 3 of them that helped me, and I think they help for not only brain injury, but other forms of adversity as well. And they are to learn about the challenge, to connect with peers, and reflect on failure. With any challenge, we have to understand what it is we're facing. Knowledge is a seed that can grow to break through denial. My own knowledge journey, it began about 8 months or so after my injury. That's when I bought my first book about brain injury. Oh, how I struggled with that book. I was having trouble reading, I still do. I couldn't remember what I was reading. I would have to go back and reread sections many times. But despite the struggle, I saw myself on the pages of that book. I saw my symptoms on the pages of that book. That recognition, it was terrifying to me, and it was comforting, both at the same time, because I was learning about myself. There were so many times when I wanted to run away from what I was learning in that book, but yet I kept coming back to it, because I was learning about myself and my injury at a very slow pace that I could handle. And I think that's an important point, that overcoming denial, it has to happen at our own pace. that trying to rush the process, it just overwhelms us. Seeds grow in their own time. So whatever the challenge is, learning about it, that's a step towards resilience. There is a special magic, I think, that happens when brain injury survivors talk to one another, because we get it. We have a shared experience. Peers can plant seeds that can help get through denial. It was a fellow brain injury survivor who helped me, who planted that first seed that helped me get over my denial about needing to use strategies to get things done. Because her injury was several years older than mine, I respected that she was somebody who knew more than I did about living with brain injury. I wanted to be like her. I wanted to get to the same level of acceptance that she had found. And one thing she talked a lot about was you need to use strategies. And that reinforced what my therapist had been trying to tell me, what my family, my friends, what everybody in my life had been trying to tell me. That hard truth that I had not wanted to hear. Sometimes I think it's easier to hear those hard truths from others who share our journey than it is from family, from friends, medical professionals. There can be tremendous power in connecting with others who share our journey. And resilience grows when we do that, when we swap stories, when we share heartbreaks and triumphs, when we know that we're not alone in what we're going through. After brain injury, so many of us, we try to go back to the way life used to be, and we fail. We struggle, we fail. Reflecting on and learning from those failures, that's another seed that can grow to break through denial. For years, I tried over and over again to return to my teaching, my music. Then one day I was meeting with my counselor, and I was sharing with her my most recent return to old life failure. And she asked me this bombshell of a question. She said, "Is it possible for you to accept that you're not going to make a full recovery?" Oh, that question that hit me like a ton of bricks. And I just instantly started sobbing. And suddenly in that moment, the fact that my old life really was over, it just hit me like it had never hit me before. It absolutely seared through me. And in that moment, I understood my failures. I had thought that I was failing because I just wasn't trying hard enough. I just needed to try harder, push harder. But that wasn't the answer at all. The reason that I was failing is because what I was attempting, it was too much for me. It was too much for my brain. A huge chunk of my rock of denial got blasted away that day. And that's when I finally stopped trying to go back to my old life, the old Carole. And I changed my focus towards learning to appreciate and accept the new Carole, the new life that I had. Every single failure we have has the opportunity to teach us something once we're willing to examine it. When we can learn from our failures, resilience has taken root. Before we move on to the next section, I'd like to take about a 15-second pause. I've got 3 of these inserted in the speech. The idea behind this is I want to give you a few moments to think about resilience, to think about how what I'm talking about, how does this apply to your own situation? You can think about a challenge you're facing personally. If you're a caregiver, how does this apply to your family member? If you're a professional, how does this apply to your client or patient? So during this 15-second pause, I invite you to think about the question on the screen and how you would answer it. So this is basically an opportunity for you to apply my strategies to your own situation. So overcoming denial, that was about clearing the boulder. Now what? When you can't go back because adversity has changed you forever and the path forward seems empty, what do? You build a brand new structure. You build a brand new life. But how the heck do you do that? Where do you start? One place to start is with observation. That's my second resilience lesson. Observe the situation. Now, in my weasel story, I caught my little friend because I observed its behavior. There's no way I ever would have come up with that idea for a successful trap if I hadn't spent all those time in the early morning hours just observing the weasel's behavior. Learning to observe ourselves, that's a critical skill for building resilience, for building new lives after adversity. The importance of self-observation has been recognized for millennia. It was the ancient Greek philosopher Socrates, among others, who said, "Know thyself." My most profound, I think, know myself moment came all the way back in 2001. It was about 2 years after my injury. And this is the observation that I can draw a straight line from this observation to the fact that I'm standing in front of you here today. And what I observed was there was this new desire in me that I wanted to use my hands to create, which was really strange because the old Carole cared nothing about using her hands to do things. This was all new Carole. There was this little voice inside me that was whispering, "Make something." No matter what challenge we face, I think we all have that little voice inside, that voice that whispers observations, that whispers self-knowledge to us, that guides us towards resilience. The little voice inside, it's a quiet voice. It's one that can't be heard when we're trying when we're living in the past, trying to get back to who we used to be. The little voice inside, it's a voice of the here and now, it's the present. It's a voice that can point us in a new direction. When I listened to that little voice inside me all those years ago that said, "Make something," that was the first time that I turned away from beating against the closed door of my old life and towards walking through the open new one. I think that's an important point, that it isn't enough just to observe our little voice inside. We have to act on it. Observation without action, it doesn't get us anywhere. I've learned that even the smallest actions can crack open new doors. The small action that I started out with was this paint by number. This was the first thing that I made. Because of my difficulties with fatigue and concentration and attention, I could only work it on this thing for about 15 minutes at a time, that I'd be so exhausted I have to take a nap for a couple of hours. But I loved working on this. When I successfully finished this, it made me think, well, what else can I make? So I got into more kinds of crafts, including jewelry making and cross-stitching and photography. You'll see a series of my resilience-inspired photos at the end of this presentation. Our actions build on one another. That I don't think it matters where we start, what we start with, because once we take one action, even just one small action, more can follow, momentum builds, and resilience takes root. I think one of the reasons that the crafts worked so well for me is that they gave me an opportunity to experience success after I had failed over and over again to return to my old life. I can't stress enough how important it is for all of us to find something we can succeed at. After brain injury, many of us fail so often that it just sends our self-esteem, our self-confidence just plummeting towards rock bottom. When we can experience success, that can be like a shot of adrenaline that can help us move forward. The more success I observed myself having with these crafts, the more motivated I was to continue building my new life. I think this observation applies to so many situations and so many challenges. Start small, find success, and build on it. It was through the crafts that I also started to observe my sense of self returning. For a long time after my brain injury, I felt like my only identity was that of professional patient. All I had to talk about was my brain injury, everything that I had lost. Crafts gave me something else to talk about. They gave me another identity. I was a person who made things. By making gifts, I could give to others instead of always being on the receiving end of help. I participated in an art show at the rehab hospital where I was a patient. People actually bought my jewelry there, which was so rewarding to me. As part of my volunteering at that hospital, I taught other brain injury survivors how to make jewelry. That led me back to teaching, which has always been one of my core identities. And it's another way to give. I began to observe that I am more than just a professional patient. I can still be useful in the world, is just different than it used to be. Getting outside oneself and finding ways to give to others, that builds resilience. In 2003, I participated in a workshop on creativity at the Maine Brain Injury Conference. As part of that workshop, I had my own table where I displayed my crafts. It was also my very first opportunity to speak publicly about my brain injury. My speech was all of 5 minutes long. I was so nervous, my knees shook the entire time that I was up there. Sharing my story in front of others, being vulnerable like that, it was a risk. But resilience doesn't build unless we're willing to take on some risk, unless we're willing to feel the fear and we choose to move forward anyway. Resilience grows when we break new ground, when we push our boundaries one small step at a time. When I spoke at that conference, it increased my self-esteem, my self-confidence. It showed me that there could be power in my story, that I could use what I had been through to help others. And even though I was so nervous giving that 5-minute speech, I had this overwhelming feeling of, I'm home. This is where I'm supposed to be. This is what I'm supposed to do. And I knew that speaking about brain injury was what I wanted to do. Sometimes when we're in the midst of the worst adversity, it can seem like the steps we're taking, they are so small, they are so slow. It can seem like we're just not moving at all. But I've learned that over time, small and slow can grow into something big and unexpected. Here's how that concept has played out for me. It's now been 16 years since my first 5-minute knee-knocking speech about brain injury. In that time, I've gone from being part of panels to giving short talks, to organizing workshops, to delivering keynotes. With help of friends, I'm now able to travel and give speeches like this one. This is my longest road trip speech. In 2010, my mentor and I founded the Maine-based survivor volunteer group, Brain Injury Voices. You can see the statistics of what we've accomplished together in 9 years. We're proof that brain injury survivors working together can make a huge difference by focusing on what we can do. It was by focusing on what I can do that I came to write a book, To Root and to Rise, Accepting Brain Injury. It took me 12 years to write this book, one small step at a time. It is a book and a workbook designed to help brain injury survivors move forward with new lives, which is the very definition of resilience that we're talking about today. The journey that led me to this moment talking to all of you, it began with an observation. It began with listening to that little voice inside me all those years ago that said, make something. Those words, make something, they're about so much more than just doing something with my hands. I didn't recognize this back then, but what I know now is that those words, make something, that they apply to make something out of tragedy, turn suffering into something meaningful. Now, I certainly did not choose to have a brain injury. None of us choose to have adversity visit our lives. But one thing we can choose is to make something meaningful out of it. Making meaning is another part of resilience. I'm choosing to do that as a brain injury speaker, a book author, and the leader of Brain Injury Voices. I never would have expected it, but through this I found my life's work. But there are so many other ways that we can make something out of adversity. It's about whatever brings a sense of purpose to your life. It could be time spent with family and friends, volunteering, creative pursuits, art, crafts, music, writing. It could be helping someone, caring for animals, tending a garden, devoting time to a spiritual practice. However it is that you choose to make meaning, the process begins with listening to your own little voice inside. It's time again to pause for our 15 seconds or so to think about the resilient strategies that I just covered and how these might apply to your own situation as a survivor, a caregiver, a professional. So I invite you to take a look at the questions on the screen and think about how this might apply to your own situation. So within this speech, I've been building resilience structure. We've kind of been moving from the ground up. Overcoming denial, that was the demolition phase. Observe the situation, that was the construction phase. My third phase, learn from the whole experience, that's about looking at the big picture. It's about gaining perspective. There's always learning to be found in any life-changing event. That is one of my core beliefs. It's also an attitude that contributes to resilience. Now, learning from life's challenges, of course, it doesn't change the fact that the challenge, whatever it might be, is extremely difficult to deal with. Having a weasel in my house was not easy. Having a brain injury has been the greatest challenge of my life. But when we can figure out what adversity has to teach us and use that learning to keep moving forward, that increases our resilience. When something bad happens to us, it's really common to ask, why did this awful thing have to happen to me? How many of us have said something like that to ourselves? I know I have. The problem is that question, it doesn't have an answer. That question tends to lead to sadness, anger, frustration, disappointment, not insight. Here are some questions that can lead to resilience. What can I learn from this situation? What does this challenge have to teach me? So, can a weasel be a teacher? Absolutely. The biggest lesson that I learned from that weasel, it actually has to do with resilience. And what I learned is that it doesn't matter if how I handle situations is not always pretty. It doesn't matter if it takes me a long time to figure things out, if I get confused, if I cry, if I have to spend hours or days recovering on the couch afterwards. What matters is that I know, without any doubt whatsoever, that I will persevere, that I will slowly find my way. Brain injury has been the greatest teacher of my life. Here are 3 lessons that I've learned from brain injury that relate to resilience. Look for silver linings, find humor, and express gratitude. The research supports that these are perspectives that contribute to resilience no matter what challenge one might be facing. I've always been a really big believer in the concept of silver linings, that something good can come from something bad. Brain injury put that belief to its biggest challenge ever. It is so challenging to find something good in something as life-consuming as brain injury. It's much easier to list all the negative consequences. They are very numerous, very real, and they turn lives upside down and inside out. It took me several years to find the silver linings in my own brain injury. At first, all I had to hold on to was my belief that they were there, even if I couldn't see them yet. I'll be honest with you, there were times when my belief in silver linings, that was one of the things that kept me from ending my life in the early years. I had to believe that something good could come from all that I was going through. So if you're in that place where you can't see how there could possibly be anything good coming from what you're going through, please have faith. You can find those silver linings. You will find them. I think of silver linings as being on one half of a balance scale, with brain injury being the enormous load on the other side. We need something to counterbalance at least a little bit of that downward weight of brain injury. Here are a few of my own silver linings. Because of brain injury, I understand more what it is to struggle, and I think I'm a better person for it. I have more empathy, compassion, perception, and wisdom. Because of brain injury, I am less of a perfectionist. I've always been a kind of a hard-charging type A person. Now I'm more like a type A minus. Because of brain injury, I have a clearer sense of purpose in my life. Brain injury gave me the passion for a cause that my life didn't have before this. Now, those silver linings, they don't magically erase all of the challenges of brain injury. They are there every single day. But the silver linings, they do make those challenges a little bit easier to deal with. They even out that scale just a little bit. Being able to see the positive within the negative, that is a hallmark of resilience. So I encourage you to think about brain injury, think about any other challenge you might be facing, and try and find a silver lining. Adversity is not funny. brain injury is definitely not funny. We can't change what happens to us. But over time, we can learn to view adversity in a different light, in a different perspective. It was Mark Twain who said, "Humor is tragedy plus time." Humor is an age-old strategy for coping with adversity. When life is falling apart and out of our control, sometimes all we can do is laugh. Humor is like WD-40. It is the grease that makes everything move just a little bit more smoothly. Now, just like silver linings, humor, it does not change the challenges of adversity, of brain injury, one iota, but it can make them a little bit easier to deal with. It took me time, but eventually I learned to view my own brain injury symptoms more lightheartedly. And that began with naming my brain injury. A lot of the time, it seems like I have two people living in my head. There's me, then there's my brain injury. I will tell you, my brain injury, she is kind of a diva. She is the one in charge, and she gets what she wants when she wants it. She is kind of a drama queen. So let's give her a dramatic-sounding name. I call her Brainhilda. A lot of my Brainhilda humor centers around my most challenging symptom, which was and continues to be extreme and often unpredictable mental fatigue. I have rested every day, oftentimes multiple times a day, every day for nearly 20 years now. I had a rest before this speech, I'll have a rest after this speech. So one day I told my doctor, I have had so much beauty sleep over the last umpteen years that one of these days, I just know it, I'm gonna wake up as a supermodel. Due to my mental fatigue, I've also had to nap in many unusual locations. When Brainhilda is taking me down, it really does not matter where I am. I pretty much have to obey. So here are some of the odder places that I have had to nap. I have rested in a classroom at a craft store, in the coffin display room at a funeral home. I rested on a couch, not in a coffin. The bedding department at a furniture store, a hotel bar. I had not been drinking, and the sign did say bar and lounge. A golf course pro shop, a fishing boat, and the Washington, D.C. conference room of my U.S. Senator. So, given all that, I tell people I sleep around. My motto is one that any Star Trek fans will appreciate: to boldly nap where no one has napped before. Humor is a healthy choice we can make for ourselves. When we can laugh, we are resilient. So I encourage you to look for ways to laugh, to choose to be amused. Expressing gratitude is about cultivating a deep appreciation, about paying attention to what's happening right now, to looking at life's small moments that oftentimes pass by us unnoticed. There are a lot of benefits to gratitude, so I'd like us to try a quick gratitude experiment. What I'm going to ask is that you look at the questions that are going to appear on the screen and think silently about how you would answer these questions. Today I'm grateful for this person in my life. This simple pleasure I enjoy. This thing that makes me smile or laugh. This information I learned today. As you think about your answers, how do you feel? Take a moment and just check in with yourself and pay attention to what's happening mentally, physically, emotionally. Gratitude is one of the simplest yet most powerful resilience tools there is. Looking for and expressing gratitude, it is a choice. It's a choice we make for ourselves. It's about choosing to find something to be thankful for, even within the midst of the darkest of feelings. It's about letting the sadness, the anger, the fear, and frustration of what's happened to us have their place, but making the conscious decision to turn away from those emotions, at least for a short time, to focus on gratitude, to focus on being thankful. It's about finding a way to live with the harsh realities of adversity. So I encourage all of you to think about ways you can make gratitude a regular practice. Before I begin to wind down this speech, it's time for one last pause. So again, I encourage you to think about the resilience strategies that I just covered and how they might apply to you as a survivor, a caregiver, professional, Again, I'm going to give you about 15 seconds to think about how you would answer the question on the screen. Resilience can be a filter to see the world through. There are bouncing forward lessons all around us if we choose to look for them. I have enjoyed finding those lessons not only in words but also in images. I mentioned earlier that I have come to enjoy photography since my brain injury. So what I've done is I've put together a short photo essay about resilience. These are my own photos and inspirational words set to music. And when this concludes, I have a few concluding remarks, then I have a special way to end this speech. So here's the photo essay. So we've been on a resilience journey this afternoon, starting with my funny weasel adventure and moving through the bouncing forward lessons inspired by it. Overcome denial, observe the situation, and learn from the experience. To close, I've written a little poem, something that brings together all the points I've made and combines my serious topic of resilience with just a little bit of weasel-inspired whimsy. I've made this poem into bookmarks for everybody, and during the Q&A that's going to follow my speech, people are going to be distributing these bookmarks throughout the audience. I also have a few more on my book table if people want them there too. Also on my book table over there is, I've made the last line of this poem into little bracelets. So anybody who wants a bracelet can get one over at my book table too. So here's my closing poem. When life throws you weasels, what do? First instinct is to hide, because you don't have a clue. Emerge from denial. Look it square in the face. When you choose to turn forward is when you really start the race. Strategies are possible if you observe with care. Help can be found when you look everywhere. So learn from this moment, and you'll manage with brilliance. Then you too can proudly say, I have Weasilience. Thank you.